Imagine replacing your mailbox again and again, only to find it smashed every time by the same patrol cars. One rancher finally said no more. What started as frustration turned into a fight that would end up in court. The sound came first, a sharp, hollow crack that echoed across the open fields like a gunshot. Curtis Delaney didn't even need to look up from his workbench in the barn. He knew that sound too well, the crunch of his mailbox being hit again. He dropped his wrench, stepped outside, and there it was, his new mailbox, barely 2 weeks old. Folded in half at the end of his ranch driveway on FM 89, just outside Abilene, Texas. The post was bent at a crooked angle, the door hanging open like a broken jaw. A white HOA patrol SUV slowed down, then kept driving as if nothing happened. Curtis rubbed his temples. At 52, he'd worked hard for his land. It wasn't a big ranch by Texas standards, but it was his pride. Fenced pastures, a small farmhouse, and a shop where he welded and fixed gear. But lately it felt like someone was determined to test his patience. He'd replaced that mailbox 4 times in 6 months. Each one cost money, each one took time, and each one ended up crushed by the same patrols. That's it, he muttered. I'm done. Across the road, his neighbor Janice Hollowbrook was walking her dog. She stopped when she saw the mess. Again? She called out. Curtis nodded. 5th time, Janice. 5th damn time. They must be doing it on purpose, she said, shaking her head. Nobody hits the same mailbox that many times unless they're blind. Blind, or they just don't care, Curtis said quietly. His anger wasn't just about the mailbox anymore. It was the way no one listened at HOA meetings, the way neighbors looked at him like he was the problem. The first time it happened, he told himself it was bad luck. By the 3rd, he knew better. Standing there again, looking at the wrecked metal, he felt something boil over inside. That night, at dinner, his wife Renee tried to calm him. Maybe move it closer to the house, she said. They can't hit it there, he shook his head. That's not the point. They'll find a way no matter where I put it. I'm not letting them push me around. His son Caleb leaned forward. You think they're doing it on purpose? Curtis hesitated. He didn't know for sure if it was on purpose or just carelessness. But it didn't matter anymore. They don't respect me, he said, and I'm tired of paying for their mistakes. The next morning, he stood by the road with a tape measure, staring at the wreckage. Cars slowed down to look. He could almost hear what they were thinking. Curtis never lets anything go. But letting go wasn't in his nature. He grew up in Wichita Falls, the son of a steelworker. He'd spent years in the oil fields before buying this ranch. He knew what it meant to fight for what was yours. And as the Texas sun burned down on his neck, he made a decision that would get the whole neighborhood talking. He was done playing nice. What he didn't know yet was that his next move wouldn't just stop the attacks. It would spark a battle that dragged everyone into it. Curtis could trace the pattern like a map. Each smashed mailbox marked another chapter of frustration. The first time was a Friday in late February. He was feeding his cattle when he heard the thud and saw a patrol SUV drive off, leaving the post split in half. He replaced it the next morning and called it bad luck. But 2 weeks later, it happened again. By the 3rd time, he'd had enough. He called the HOA office and asked to speak to whoever ran the patrols. The young receptionist promised to pass the message along. No one called back. At the next HOA meeting, Chairman Gregory Winslow leaned back in his chair and said, Curtis, those roads are tight. It happens 5 times in half a year, Curtis said. You think that's normal? Winslow shrugged. Part of living out here. Maybe move your post back a bit. Curtis clenched his jaw. The meeting rolled on, but he couldn't let it go. When he got home, he slammed his truck door. They don't care, Renee. Not one bit. It wasn't just about a mailbox anymore. It was about respect. A few days later, an older man named Sherman Hayes stopped him at the grocery store. I've seen your mailbox keep getting hit, Sherman said. You sure they're not doing that on purpose? You went against Winslow about that fence rule last year, didn't you? Curtis hadn't forgotten. He'd fought Winslow before and won. Maybe this was payback, because every time he replaced that mailbox, it got hit again, while every other one on the street stayed untouched. At night, he'd sit on the porch with Renee, staring at the road. They think I'll give up, he'd mutter. Will you? She'd ask. Not a chance. The more he thought about Winslow's smirk, the more it burned. He was tired of being ignored, tired of being dismissed, so he started planning. Late at night in his shop, he drew up designs, thick steel beams, bolts, concrete bases. If they wanted to hit his mailbox again, fine. This time the mailbox would hit back. But before he could start building, one more HOA meeting would push him from angry to furious. The community center smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. Curtis sat in the back, arms folded. He wasn't here for small talk. He was here to make them listen. At the front sat the HOA board, 5 people behind a long table. In the middle was Gregory Winslow, silver hair slicked back, wearing a suit like he ran a company instead of a Texas neighborhood. "All right, folks," Gregory said, tapping the mic. "Landscaping updates first, then patrol reports, then public comments." Curtis could feel his jaw tighten. He'd heard this routine before. When the floor opened, he stood up. "I've got something to say," he announced. Heads turned. Winslow forced a smile. "Go ahead, Mr. Delaney." "That's the 5th mailbox this year," Curtis said. "Same story every time. Patrol car runs it over, nothing happens." "I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking why the people we pay to protect this place keep destroying my property." A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Some looked down. Others leaned forward. "Curtis," Winslow said, "accidents happen. The patrols are doing their best. Those roads—" "Don't say it's the roads," Curtis interrupted. "My neighbors' mailboxes are still standing. Mine get crushed over and over. Either they're careless or they're doing it on purpose. Either way, I'm the one paying for it." A board member, Pamela Griggs, tried to speak. "Maybe it's the placement." "It's not the placement," Curtis snapped. "It's not luck. It's happening too often to be random." Winslow leaned back, calm and smug. "You've got to understand these patrols are volunteers." "They're our neighbors," Curtis narrowed his eyes. "Volunteers don't drive SUVs with flashing lights." And with that, the room went silent. "Volunteers don't cost me 5 mailboxes in 6 months," Curtis said flatly. The room went quiet. A man in the second row whispered something to his wife, and she shook her head quickly. Curtis noticed. He always did. Gregory finally raised his voice, just enough to sound in charge. "Look, we can't reimburse every resident for every accident. If we did, the HOA would be broke in a month. Maybe, like I said before, you should move your mailbox back a few feet. That would solve your problem." The words hung heavy in the E. Solve your problem, as if Curtis was the one in the wrong. He took a slow breath. He wasn't the kind of man who lost his temper easily, but his voice still trembled when he spoke. "That box is on my land. It's not in the road. It's not sticking out. It's where it belongs, and you all know it." Silence settled over the room. Then Sherman Hayes, the neighbor from the grocery store, spoke up. "Gregory, he's right. I've lived on this road 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Somebody's mailbox keeps getting hit again and again. That ain't normal." All eyes turned to the board. Pamela fiddled with her papers. Gregory shifted in his seat before forcing a tight smile. "We'll make a note of your concern, Curtis. That's all we can do right now." Curtis felt the heat rise in his chest. A note. That was it? After months of damage, wasted money, and being ignored, he turned and walked out without another word. The scrape of his boots echoed down the hallway as his neighbors whispered behind him. Outside, Sherman caught up. "You gave it to him straight in there," he said. "Don't let him make you the problem. He's protecting them, not you." Curtis nodded slowly, eyes on the horizon. "Then I'll protect myself." But this time, he wasn't talking about words. He was already imagining steel, concrete, and a mailbox that wouldn't bow to anyone. By the next week, whispers had spread through the community faster than wildfire. Curtis didn't have to guess what people were saying. He heard it everywhere. At the feed store in Buffalo Gap, at the gas station off Highway 83, they say he went off on Winslow at the meeting. Wouldn't surprise me. Curtis always did have a temper. Should just let it go. It's a mailbox, not the Alamo. Curtis kept his head down, but every word stung. Somehow he had become the troublemaker, not the victim. One Saturday, While sorting tools in the barn, his neighbor, Edith Rowland, showed up. Sharp-tongued and nosy as ever, she leaned against the doorframe. "You really gave Greg a mouthful the other night," she said. "I spoke my piece," Curtis replied without looking up. Edith smirked. "Well, now folks are saying you're just picking fights. That mailbox ain't worth losing friends over." Curtis wiped sweat from his forehead and met her eyes. "It's not about the mailbox. It's about respect. If it was your fence or your porch getting smashed, you wouldn't let it go either." Edith frowned, chewing on that for a moment before muttering, "Maybe so." Then she walked away. That evening, Curtis sat on the porch with Renee, listening to the cicadas hum. She could see the weight on his shoulders. "You're not sleeping," she said softly. "I keep running it through my head," he admitted. "What if Sherman's right? What if this is their way of getting back at me for pushing back before? Every time I stand up to that board, Winslow acts like I don't belong here." Renee squeezed his hand. "You do belong here. Don't let them make you think otherwise." But the pressure didn't stop. The next day, Curtis went into town and overheard two men talking near the hardware store counter. "Delaney's mailbox again," one said. "Yeah, I heard he's blaming the patrol. Figures, always looking for a fight." Curtis tightened his grip on the bag of nails in his hand, then set it down and walked out before he said something he'd regret. When he got home, his son Caleb was waiting by the shop. "Dad, people at school are saying you're planning to sue the HOA. That true?" "Suing costs money we don't have," Curtis said. "No, I'm not suing." "Then what are you going to do?" Caleb asked. Curtis ran a hand across the cold steel beams stacked in the corner. Pieces of an idea were already in motion. "I'm going to build something," he said finally. "Something they can't break." Caleb grinned. "Like a tank?" Curtis smiled faintly. "Close enough." That night, Renee looked uneasy. "What if this just makes things worse? People are already talking." "They're already against me, Renee," he said. "Even if I did nothing, they'd find a reason. At least this way, it'll be on my terms." Word of his plan spread faster than he expected. Curious neighbors began stopping by. Sherman showed up again and eyed the steel laid out across the shop. "You're serious about this?" "Dead serious," Curtis replied. "Won't they just say you're setting a trap?" Curtis gave a short laugh. "Then let them. I'm not setting a trap. I'm setting a boundary. There's a difference." The town was divided. Some admired his determination. Others whispered that he'd lost it. The HOA board stayed silent, and Gregory's smug attitude only fueled the tension. The neighborhood had turned into a quiet battleground of gossip and sides. But Curtis's resolve only hardened. By late spring, the decision was made. He was done waiting. The shop behind his farmhouse became his war room. Each night after dinner, he'd pull on his gloves, lower his welding mask, and let sparks fly. The sharp, metallic rhythm echoed across the pasture like a forge at work. Curtis had always been handy. Oil fields, ranch repairs, he'd done it all. But this was different. This was armor. One Saturday, Caleb wandered in holding a soda. "Dad, what are you building exactly?" he yelled over the grinder. Curtis lifted his mask and wiped sweat from his brow. "A mailbox they'll never forget," Caleb laughed nervously. "You're serious?" Curtis motioned toward the steel plate on the bench. "Does this look like a joke?" Beneath a pile of cedar planks sat a steel skeleton, 3 feet deep in concrete and reinforced with rebar. From the outside, it would look like any ordinary mailbox, but inside, it was a fortress. Renee walked in, towel in hand. "Curtis, you really think this is the answer?" "I know it is," he said. She crossed her arms. "And what if someone gets hurt?" Curtis set down the torch. "They've been hurting me, Renee. Every time they drive through that box, they're saying my property doesn't matter. If they hit this one, they'll finally feel what I've been feeling." She sighed. "I just don't want this to turn into something worse." He softened his tone. "I'm not looking for worse. I'm looking for peace." But sometimes peace means showing people where the line is. A week later, Sherman stopped by again, leaning against the doorframe. "You really think Winslow's gonna let this slide?" Curtis shrugged. "Winslow's opinion doesn't pay my bills. This is about me, not him." Sherman nodded slowly. "It's bold. Folks will call you either a genius or a fool." Curtis grinned. "Maybe both." When June rolled around, Curtis got to work. He dug the trench along the road, sweat pouring in the Texas heat, mixing cement, setting steel, reinforcing it deep into the earth. By sunset, the skeleton stood firm. Over the next few days, he wrapped it in cedar, sanded and stained it until it looked perfectly ordinary. To a passerby, it was just another country mailbox. But Curtis knew better. When he finally stepped back to admire it, Caleb whistled. "Looks normal to me. That's the point," Curtis said. "Looks ordinary, but it's not." Neighbors noticed soon enough. Edith strolled by, squinting at it. "New mailbox again?" she asked. Curtis smiled. "Yeah, let's hope this one lasts." For the first time in months, he felt calm. At night, he'd sit on the porch with Renee, sipping sweet tea, watching the headlights pass. For once, he didn't feel dread, maybe even a little anticipation. And it wouldn't take long. Because the next time a patrol SUV came down that road, the crash would send shockwaves through the whole neighborhood. The impact came on a Thursday afternoon. Curtis was in the barn, oiling a saddle when the sound hit, not the thin crunch of tin, but a deep, brutal thud, like steel meeting bone. He dropped the rag and ran. A white HOA patrol SUV sat half off the road, hood crumpled, steam rising into the sky. The front bumper was hanging, headlights shattered, debris scattered across the gravel. And there, standing tall and untouched, was Curtis's mailbox. Perfect, unmarked, unbreakable. The driver, a young man Curtis didn't recognize, sat frozen behind the wheel, gripping it like it might disappear. Slowly he opened the door and stumbled out, dazed and wide-eyed. Curtis walked over, boots crunching on the gravel. "You all right?" he asked. The man blinked, still trying to make sense of what happened. What the hell is that thing?" Curtis didn't answer right away. He turned to look at his mailbox, standing tall, gleaming in the afternoon sun, the cedar shining like polished armor. For the first time in months, a smile tugged at his lips. "It's a mailbox," he said simply. Within minutes, neighbors began gathering. Janice Hollowbrook jogged up with her dog, eyes darting from the wrecked SUV to the unscathed post. "Lord have mercy, Curtis. That thing didn't even move." "Wasn't supposed to," Curtis replied calmly. The patrol driver rubbed his forehead. "I barely clipped it. Thing tore the front of my truck apart." "You can't put something like that on the road." Curtis crossed his arms. "And you can't keep running over my property." "That's the real problem." Sherman Hayes chuckled from the crowd, leaning on his cane. "Looks like you built yourself a fortress, Curtis." Damn thing might outlast the house, but not everyone was amused. Edith Rowland shook her head. "You'll get yourself sued, Curtis." "What if someone got hurt?" Curtis looked at her firmly. "What if, Edith? I've been paying out of pocket every time these patrols destroy my box. Where was your concern then?" The crowd fell silent. The patrol driver pulled out his phone, muttering about calling the HOA. By evening, Gregory Winslow arrived in his polished black sedan, looking more politician than neighbor. He stepped out, jaw tight. "Curtis," he said, voice clipped. "What is this?" Curtis leaned on the post. "A mailbox. Stronger than the last 5. Gregory's eyes flicked from the wreckage back to Curtis. "This is reckless. You've created a hazard." "Look what it's done to this vehicle." Curtis shot back, voice steady. "Look what they've done to my property." 5 times. Not once did you show up. Not once did you offer to fix it. Now suddenly you care? Murmurs rippled through the neighbors. Sherman nodded in agreement. Gregory's tone sharpened. "This isn't about you, Curtis. It's about community safety. If one of our patrol drivers had been seriously injured..." "Don't twist it." Curtis cut him off. "The only reason we're here is because your patrol can't drive straight. Stop running into my mailbox and nobody gets hurt." For the first time, Gregory hesitated. He looked around for support, but the crowd was divided. Half stood with Curtis, arms crossed, tired of the patrols. The other half whispered about lawsuits and danger. Then Renee stepped up beside her husband, calm but firm. "We've lived here 12 years. Curtis has never caused trouble. He's just asking for what's fair." Gregory realized he'd lost control of the moment. His face tightened. "This isn't over," he muttered, retreating to his car. As his sedan pulled away, Curtis stood in the fading sunlight, one hand resting on his mailbox. For once, he didn't feel defeated. For once, he felt the balance had shifted. Caleb walked up beside him. "You think they'll leave it alone now?" Curtis kept his eyes on the road. "We'll see." But deep down he knew the mailbox hadn't ended the fight. It had just lit the fuse, and the explosion was only beginning. The HOA claimed Curtis's mailbox had already damaged a patrol vehicle and warned of possible legal action from contractors. Curtis stood up immediately. "That mailbox is on my land. It's solid, not unsafe. If your drivers can't handle their vehicles, that's not my fault." Gregory tried to quiet the crowd, but voices rose anyway. "He's right," someone shouted. "Why should he pay for their mistakes?" Another neighbor argued, "It's a hazard. What if an ambulance hits it?" A voice fired back. "Ambulances don't aim for mailboxes." Gregory slammed his hand on the table. "Enough! Mr. Delaney, you're in violation of HOA guidelines. If you refuse to comply, fines will begin immediately." Curtis glared at him. "I'm not paying a dime for protecting what's mine." The room grew tense until Sherman spoke from the back. "Gregory, you're crossing a line. That mailbox isn't hurting anyone, just careless drivers. You just don't like that Curtis stood up to you." The crowd erupted again, some clapping, others muttering. Gregory's face turned red, and he quickly adjourned the meeting. Outside, Curtis and Sherman walked to their trucks. "He's not going to let this go," Sherman warned. Curtis nodded. "Neither am I." That night, patrol SUVs slowed down near Curtis's house. One even parked across the street for an hour, headlights aimed at his porch. Renee pulled the curtains. "Curtis, this isn't just an argument anymore, it's a fight." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll fight it together." What Curtis didn't know was that the fight was about to move to court, and the stakes would be higher than ever. The legal notice arrived on a humid July morning, tucked in a plain white envelope bearing the HOA's letterhead. Renee found it first, sitting in the very mailbox they were suing him over. Her hands trembled as she handed it to Curtis. "They're suing you," she whispered. Curtis opened it slowly, scanning lines of legal jargon. Violation of community standards, unsafe obstruction, public hazard. At the bottom was Gregory Winslow's signature. Caleb slammed his chair back. "This is garbage." "They're the ones hitting it." Curtis just stared at the paper, then folded it neatly. "They want a fight in court. Fine, we'll give them one." That evening, Sherman stopped by. "Curtis, lawsuits bleed folks dry. Winslow's counting on you to quit." Curtis sipped his tea. "If I back down now, I prove him right." "I'll fight," Sherman nodded. "Then you'll need help." Help came from attorney Maxine Porter, a sharp woman from Abilene known for taking down overreaching HOAs. Sitting in Curtis's living room, she flipped through the complaint with a smirk. "They're reaching," she said. "Mailboxes must meet postal standards, not HOA egos." "You've done nothing wrong," Curtis asked. "So we can win?" Maxine shrugged. "We can hold our ground. Winslow doesn't want to win, he wants to wear you out." "Be ready for the long haul," Renee frowned. "Can we afford this?" Maxine replied, "There'll be costs, but I've handled cases like this. Most fold before trial." "He's betting on intimidation," Curtis nodded. "Then let's show him I'm not scared." The next few weeks were heavy. Curtis worked the ranch, fixed fences, tended cattle, but the lawsuit followed him everywhere. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Some quietly supported him, dropping off casseroles or notes of encouragement. One evening, Gregory pulled up in his sedan. "You think this is a game, Curtis?" he called. Curtis wiped his hands on a rag. "No, I think you're afraid of losing control." Gregory sneered. "You're dividing this community. Take it down, and this all ends." Curtis leaned on the fence. "Not a chance." Gregory's eyes darkened. "Then you'll regret it." He rolled up the window and sped off. 2 weeks before trial, Maxine called. "They've dropped it. Too much backlash. Too much attention. Winslow couldn't risk losing in front of a judge. Curtis stood silent, the words sinking in. After months of threats and pressure, the fight was over. That evening, the family sat on the porch watching the sun set. Renee leaned on his shoulder, finally at ease. Caleb grinned. Sherman arrived with sweet tea. "To standing your ground," he said, raising his glass. Curtis smiled. "And to never letting them run you over." The mailbox still stood by the road, cedar shining in the fading light. To others it was just a mailbox. To Curtis it was a monument, a reminder that one man could hold the line. His victory wasn't about winning in court. It was about earning respect. Curtis hadn't meant to become a symbol, but he did. His mailbox became a message, a warning, and a lesson. Drivers still slowed down when they passed. Some nodded in respect, others muttered, but all noticed. Curtis didn't care about approval. What mattered was reclaiming his dignity after months of being dismissed. "It's not about the mailbox," he told Caleb one night. "It's about standing your ground. If you let people walk over you once, they'll keep doing it." Later, Sherman stopped by again. "Funny thing, Curtis. That mailbox has got folks talking. Some say it's defiance. Others call it common sense. Either way, you made them notice." Curtis smiled. "Sometimes that's how you earn respect. You don't ask for it, you prove it." Sherman chuckled. "That thing'll outlast both of us." Curtis looked toward the horizon. "Maybe that's the lesson. You can't control what people do, but you can control how you respond." The neighborhood eventually quieted down. The patrols drove slower. Winslow kept his distance. Life moved on. Curtis had been tested and hadn't broken. His story carried one message: standing up for yourself matters. It protects more than your land, it protects your dignity. So if you've ever been ignored or pushed around, remember Curtis's fight. You don't have to shout or strike back. Sometimes standing firm is enough. Build your own indestructible mailbox, because respect isn't given, it's earned. And sometimes it has to be taken back. If this story meant something to you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Stand tall, stand firm, and never let anyone run you over.